massive crabs, saving the big cats, and drinking gin at the end of the world. This week, we're in Patagonia and Tierra del Fuego.
Traveling the world to bring you delicious dishes, tasty beverages, and interesting experiences. This is the Destination Eat Drink Podcast on the Radio Misfits Podcast Network.
I'm Brent Peterson. Welcome to Destination Eat Drink, the travel podcast for foodies. This is where we try the great dishes of the world at destinationeatdrink.com and on the Destination Eat Drink podcast. And this week, travel writer Shafik Meghji is here to talk about his excursions to Patagonia and Tierra del Fuego. But first, if you like the Destination Eat Drink podcast, please rate and review us on your podcast app. It really helps the show, and thank you so very, very much. Shafik Meghji is an award-winning travel writer who writes for guidebooks like Lonely Planet, as well as outlets like BBC Travel, Wanderlust, and Adventure Magazine. Last year, Shafik published his travel memoir, Crossed Off the Map, Travels in Bolivia. Shafik and I talk about his travels in Patagonia and down to Tierra del Fuego, and he tells me about the people who live in this rugged terrain at the end of the world, as well as the dishes he had there, like massive crabs. Shafik also tells me about some places closer to his home in England, like a reclaimed industrial site that's now a biodiverse park, and a rainforest. That's right, a rainforest in the UK. Okay, I'm starving, so let's eat.
Destination Eat Drink.
Shafik, great to have you back on Destination Eat Drink. It's been a while since we've talked, so I'm happy to have you back to talk about Patagonia and Tierra del Fuego.
Brent, it's lovely to be talking to you again. And as you say, it's been far too long.
You wrote the chapters about the Chilean Patagonia and Tierra del Fuego for the new edition of Lonely Planet. Tell me a little bit about the actual logistics of getting to Patagonia, because to me it seems like such a remote, faraway, exotic place. Is this something that an everyday traveler can do fairly easily?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I've just finished my research trip for the forthcoming edition of Planet Chile, and it took me to one of my favorite parts of the world, which is Chilean Patagonia and Tierra del Fuego. And as you say, the fact that it's so far flung, that it feels so remote, that it feels so far away from all of us here in the UK, in the US, in Europe, is part of the attraction. Ironically, it's actually a bit easier to get to than you might expect. On the Chilean side, if you fly into Santiago, the capital, which is in central Chile, you can fly down to Punta Arenas, which is the biggest city in Chilean Patagonia. That's about a 3.5 hour flight, and it's quite similar with the Argentine side as well. Tierra del Fuego, which is to provide a bit of geographic context, Patagonia is the southern part of South America, and then there's the Strait of Magellan separates it from the archipelago that is Tierra del Fuego. And Tierra del Fuego is a tangle of islands and channels, and very, very sparsely populated. And then below that, there's nothing but some of the roughest seas on Earth and Antarctica. So getting to Patagonia is easier than you might expect. You can go, you can fly and you can go by bus. Getting onto Tierra del Fuego takes a little bit more planning, and part of that is because the weather is so unpredictable. Even at we're at the tail end of the summer there now. Even in the summer, it's a bit unpredictable.
This is why I like talking to you, Shafik, because it's very rare that, when I talk to you, it's about a luxe city break. You're going to these far-flung, out-of-the-way places that are hard to get to and, are rather inhospitable, I would say. And I wanted to ask you, because I think when we're talking about remote places like this, and Tierra del Fuego, certainly one of the most remote places on Earth, when you've got it, whether it's a difficult environment from a climate standpoint, or it's remote because of mountains, or it's a faraway island, these places, in my opinion, tend to attract a certain type of person, a certain psychological profile that maybe doesn't fit in with quote unquote normal society. And I'm not using that as a pejorative at all. I'm just saying, it tends to attract maybe a different type of person in this difficult environment. Would you agree with that assessment, Shafik, from your visits to Tierra del Fuego and Patagonia?
Yeah, it definitely you definitely have to be a hardy, self-sufficient kind of personality to build a life in somewhere like Tierra del Fuego in particular. Probably the best illustration of that is one of my favorite places, somewhere I was in just a couple of months ago, called Puerto Williams. And Puerto Williams is the southernmost city on Earth. It sits on the Beagle Channel. Has about 2,000 people there, and the only way that you can get there is you can fly, or you can get there by ferry. There are no road connections with the rest of Chile, or indeed with Argentina. Tierra del Fuego is split roughly between Argentina and Chile, just to provide a bit of context. So Puerto Williams is far flung. It's a long way from anywhere else. This is literally, while I was there, I traveled along to the end of the road, literally, as in there's no way further south that you can drive on Earth. So it's a particular landscape. It's on the shores of the Beagle Channel. It's backed by an incredible mountain range, the Dientes de Navarino, which is a place for a wonderful, rugged backcountry trek. And you're right in the sense that it very much attracts a particular kind of people, but it's also more diverse than you might expect. So its history is as a naval base. So roughly half of the population are still serving in the Navy, with civilian staff linked to the naval base there. There's a small indigenous Yagan community, and the indigenous peoples of Tierra del Fuego and Patagonia are often overlooked and have a challenging history, to say the least. But there's a Yagan community just outside Puerto Williams who play a very important role in the city. And then there's also in the rest of the population made up by Chilean, sometimes from Patagonia, but often further afield. Many of them had come from middle Chile, so Santiago, the biggest city. Sometimes from further north towards the Atacama Desert. Complete contrast in landscapes. One of the driest places on Earth to somewhere that's somewhere that's very, very, very wet and emerald green and so on. But there's also it attracts, because it's such a far-flung place. The landscape is so dramatic because it's essentially it's a romantic place. It's an evocative place. It attracts people from further afield. So I met a wonderful Austrian woman there who came to teach and then fell in love and ended up staying. There's a great Colombian restaurant there. So if you want a touch of the Caribbean at the opposite end of the Americas, you can sit down for some good hearty food there and some excellent Colombian music. I also met an Argentine gardener and travel writer who lives there, who again is from kind of the central part of Argentina. So there's a real mix of people that, despite being at, quote unquote, the end of the world, it's a lot more cosmopolitan than you might expect. But everyone loves the landscapes there, and everyone, either is or has had to learn how to be, self-sufficient and able to put up with often quite extreme weather, and often and able to put up with being a long way away from most other parts of the country.
Sounds like a beautiful landscape. Rugged is a word that you used multiple times there, and I have this picture in my mind as to what that means. But I wanted to ask you quickly, because you mentioned a Colombian restaurant. So I imagine there's not a restaurant row in Puerto Williams. So what was this restaurant like, and what were some of the dishes that you enjoyed there, and some of the drinks? I imagine in rugged places like this, there's a little bit of drinking that goes on.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. This is quite an interesting point to raise up, because when I visited, I've been to Puerto Williams a few times, and when I visited in late 2022, the restaurants and bars there had suffered many of the same issues that, you know, restaurants and bars had suffered around the world during the pandemic, and so actually quite a few of the places that I visited had closed for the same reasons that restaurants and pubs and so on in London and in New York and all around the world had, because it was obviously a very difficult time. There's more restaurants than you might think. There's several to choose from. Most do kind of Chilean classics, but yeah, this Colombian restaurant, which is in the city centre. City centre is massively overstating it. It's kind of like maybe a dozen small shops, but it's a really fun place. It's you know, as I say, the food and the music's good, and it's the kind of things that you would eat in, you know, if you're in Bogota or Cartagena. So it's kind of hearty meals, and so on. And talking about drinks as well, then, you know, in Tierra del Fuego and Patagonia more generally, you know, there's some great local breweries. Craft beer has made it here as well, so you can have some very good beers as well. In terms, one of the favourite bars that I went to, my favourite bar of my most recent trip was actually was at Patagonia. So this is just a bit further north, near Torres del Paine National Park, which is the biggest attraction in Chilean Tierra del Fuego. Even if you haven't been there, you would have seen the incredible granite spires that adorn Chilean tourist brochures and so on. But the gateway town to that is a place called Puerto Natales, which is also pretty remote, and but that's got a great gin distillery called the Last Resort, Last Hope, rather, and that was set up by Australian backpackers who were traveling through the region, and came to hike and fell in love with the place and started distilling their own gin. There's also a whiskey on the in the pipeline too, and they have a fantastic bar, and they do tours as well. And one of the interesting gins they do like a classic London style gin. They also do one that's flavored with a berry called calafate. So calafate is a Patagonian berry. It's packed with vitamin and stuff. It's very, very good for you, but it's also the local story across Patagonia is that if you eat the calafate berry, then you'll definitely return to Patagonia in the future. So, as you might expect, it appears in sauces and in ice creams. But this was the first time that I'd had it in a gin, which was excellent. So so that's a bit of a taste of some of the drinks that you can get in this part of the world.
I love that they're using the local berry in their gin. And you must love it too, because, you're British, so you're always sampling gin. I would imagine you're always happy to see new and different kinds of gin coming around. I have this vision that we're between two oceans. We've got the Strait of Magellan to our south, and beyond that, Antarctica. So I imagine the diet is pretty rich in stuff that we're pulling out of the sea. Would that be a correct observation?
Yeah, so there's a big fishing industry in particularly in Chilean Patagonia and Tierra del Fuego. There's lots of salmon farms, which have provided lots of jobs, but have proved very controversial, to say the least. There was near Puerto Williams, there was quite a high-profile battle against the opening of a salmon farm in the Beagle Channel. That was led by members of the indigenous Yagan community, and that was successful in that they managed to prevent it opening and expanding. But yeah, so salmon you get across the region. My favourite of the seafood is something called sendoja, which is king crab, and these are absolute beasts. They're about a metre from the tip of their legs, from one leg to another. They have to be so big to survive in the frigid waters that surround Tierra del Fuego, and they're absolutely delicious. It's a very lucrative fishing business, so yeah, they often appear on menus. They don't come cheap, so they're not, they're not eaten with wild abandon, but they're an absolute must if you're in the southern part of South America. But the key food stuff, the key animal that has shaped the recent history of this part of the world is our sheep and lamb, of course. So the introduction of sheep about 120 years ago, 130 years ago, changed the course of this part of the world. It created great fortunes. It changed the landscapes. Had a terrible impact on the indigenous populations, and sent cheap, expensive lamb around the world, and wool too. And so having a cordero al palo, which is basically slow cooked barbecued lamb, is an absolute essential. And the estancias, which are the sheep ranch dot Patagonia, are absolutely the best place to sample probably some of the best lamb that you ever have. And I say that as both a British person and someone with a Welsh girlfriend. And Wales is absolutely famous for its lamb. So, but Patagonian lamb is particularly good, and it also gives a bit of an insight into the history of it. Food's wonderful for telling stories, so it's a delicious meal. It gives you an insight into the history of the region, and it also gives you an insight into the culture and lives of the gauchos, of the cowboys who still patrol these vast ranches. And though the industry isn't quite as profitable as it was a century ago, it's still a big industry there. And as you travel across these incredible landscapes, passing fields and Andean peaks and so on, you'll see huge long areas fenced off, and those are the sheep ranches, and many of these you can stay on as well, which is a wonderful experience.
It occurs to me, Shafik, you talked about craft beer, you talked about the local gin distillery, and I noticed that you didn't mention pisco, which is something that we've talked about on the podcast with you before, specifically in Argentina and Chile. Well, we're here in Chile. Do we have pisco here, or is this just not something that we would see in this part of Chile?
Yeah, I mean, funny enough, I've just written a piece on the history of pisco and the rivalry between Chile and Peru for a magazine called Tonic.
Peru, of course.
Rest assured, you very much can get pisco all the way down in Tierra del Fuego and Patagonia, just as you can up in the north in the Atacama Desert. Pretty much everywhere you go in Chile, you can get a quality pisco sour. Although I should say at the Last Hope bar, they do not serve pisco sours. It's very much gin, including their own gins, and whiskey is the order of the day there. But yeah, you can get pisco, and it's just as popular in the cold south as it is in middle Chile in the north.
You mentioned the native population, Shafik, and you said they're often overlooked when folks talk about Patagonia and Tierra del Fuego. If we go down here to this part of the world, is there a good way to maybe immerse ourselves or help to understand or learn about the culture of these native peoples?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is something I always want to try and highlight in my writing, because it is an aspect that is overlooked. Yeah, there's a few things that I would recommend when you're in Patagonia, in Punta Arenas and Puerto Natales particularly. They have some excellent museums, history museums, that provide a bit of an insight to the incredible cultures of the indigenous peoples who lived in the region, and also the impact of the arrival of Europeans, of colonialism, and also, crucially, sheep ranching, which displaced huge numbers of indigenous populations. And in some cases, sheep ranchers hired people to literally hunt indigenous communities. So it's a tough history, but it's one that it's important to learn about. If you go to Tierra del Fuego and if you go to Puerto Williams, there's still a indigenous Yargan community there. Most of the community live in a place called Villa Uquica, which is like a neighborhood, a hamlet just outside the main city. And there's also some excellent indigenous guides who do kayaking trips, who do horse riding expeditions, who offer cultural experiences. I'd really recommend, if you're interested in learning about the indigenous Yargan communities, and also you want to financially support these communities, then take a tour with one of their guides, and you'll have an incredible experience. Puerto Williams also has an excellent museum that's currently being renovated, but will be open for a bit later this year, and that also offers really excellent background on the tumultuous history of this region, and also of the indigenous communities who managed to carve out an incredible existence in one of the toughest landscapes on Earth.
Great advice, Shafik, and I'm going to second that. Hire a local guide. Get to know someone who's living down there and who understands the history, and you will be rewarded tenfold for whatever you spend. I wanted to ask you about something else that you did while you were down there. You visited a place called the Puma Conservation Project. I guess I didn't think that there would be large cats down there in Tierra del Fuego. I don't know why I thought this, but maybe if you could educate me a little about what's going on down there with the pumas.
Yeah, this was a really interesting experience, and it actually, because everything's connected, it links very closely with the the sheep ranching industry in Patagonia. So traditionally, Patagonia has been home to huge, big cats, and it had big puma populations. But as you might expect, in a place where the main industry was sheep ranching, pumas and sheep ranchers quickly came into conflict. And even though the region is vast, pumas would often prey on the sheep, and then they would be hunted by the ranchers. So huge numbers have been wiped out, dating back a century ago, along with other native wildlife. And even though it's illegal today, puma hunting still goes on under the radar among many ranches in Patagonia. But there's one ranch called Cerro Guido, which is just outside Torres del Paine National Park, that's trying to change things, and it's launched a pioneering conservation project. So years ago, the estancia, the gauchos on the estancia would hunt pumas, but the owners have now taken a different approach. Hunting has been banned, and instead they've launched their conservation project to study the animals. They've set up camera traps. They're also using humane deterrents, so flashing lights, and also these incredible dogs that come from the Pyrenees originally that look like sheep, huge sheep, and live amongst the sheep and help to deter the pumas. And it's actually had it's already just a few years into the project. It's provided a fascinating insight into the lives of the pumas. They've been able to study their behaviors and habitats in great detail. They've managed to cut down on the number of sheep lost to pumas. So they're providing an example for other estancias to say, you don't have to hunt pumas to protect your sheep. There is a better, more humane way. And also tourism plays a huge part in this, because alongside the scientific research, they offer tours. So I spent a day with one of the estancia's puma trackers, getting up very, very early in the morning, far too early in the morning, to head out into this beautiful landscape. No tourists, absolutely no tourists at all. to study, to follow in the footsteps of the trackers, see how they work, and if you're lucky. And I wasn't lucky, so I didn't see a puma on this occasion. But if you're lucky, you may well spot a puma in very much in their natural habitat. But it's it was an incredible experience. You learn a huge amount, and again, it offers it shows estancias and ranchers in the region that, hey, it's more valuable to conserve the pumas and use sustainable, responsible tourism and earn money that way, rather than continue to hunt them. So this project is continuing to expand. Hopefully, other ranches will pick it up. But again, if you're visiting in the region and you want to have a positive impact on the local wildlife, this is a great way to do it.
This will be something that I'm going to be doing. I'm going to go look for pumas when I'm in Tierra del Fuego, whenever that happens to be. Shafik, let's go from one end of the earth to another, your corner of the world outside of London, because you just wrote a couple really interesting pieces. And before I let you go, I wanted to talk about a couple of them. One is called Canvey Wick, which is near London, really close to London. I'm not going to say anything about it. I read the article. I enjoyed it, but I want to have you describe a little bit about Canvey Wick, because you went there, you wrote the piece.
Yeah, I mean, I'm always interested in unexpected landscapes and unexpected, I guess, biodiversity hotspots. And Canvey Wick, which is it's around 30 miles east of London in Essex. Is very much that, and yet it's somewhere that would be often overlooked, and indeed on first glance doesn't look like much at all. So it's on Canvey Island, which is, as the name suggests, is just off the coast of southern Essex, and it's in the Thames estuary, and it's very much an industrial or post-industrial landscape. There's lots of out of town shopping centres and factories and petrochemical industries and that kind of thing. It's not the prettiest place at first glance, and it's super close to London. But on the edge of it is a place called Canvey Wick, which is essentially an abandoned oil refinery. So there were plans to build an oil refinery there in the 1970s, and then the oil shocks and the unrest in the Middle East in the 1970s made it financially inviable to keep building it. So it was abandoned halfway through. The buildings were abandoned, and essentially for several decades afterwards, nothing happened. It was left to nature, and this this partially contaminated post-industrial landscape subsequently has become one of the most biodiverse places in the UK. It's particularly rich in invertebrates. So there's about 1,500 invertebrate species. It has an incredible amount of wildflowers, particularly orchids. And funnily enough, that's partly because the land was partially contaminated. And this contamination prevented the growth of trees and dominant vegetation that would otherwise have dominated. And it allowed these wildflowers to grow. So you've got this kind of open, flower-rich grassland. And it's an absolutely fascinating place. It's on, it's on a walkway, hiking route along the banks of the Thames. But many people overlook it, really. And to be honest, before I learnt about it, I hadn't heard about it otherwise. But it's been compared. There's a lovely description of it by a scientist who described it as a brownfield rainforest.
Huh.
So it's a fascinating place. It's very easy to get to from London, and it doesn't fit your typical idea of what a biodiversity hotspot looks like. But it's an absolutely fascinating place. It also, and given that I know your love of interest in food and drink stories, it's also next to very near to an excellent pub called the Lobster Smack, which is a very traditional pub. It features in Charles Dickens. It's got lots of great stories about smuggling and bare knuckle boxing and so on. And you can get a good pint and a tasty plate of meal, tasty food there as well. So so that's something to do. The other reason I was interested in Canvey Wick is it's Canvey Island is low-lying, partially reclaimed land, and if you go there, there's a serpentine seawall that prevents it from flooding. They've had some terrible floods in the past, but obviously because of the climate emergency, this is somewhere that's going to be particularly at risk. So it's kind of you see a place that's particularly at risk of the climate emergency, but also you see the rewilding, the importance of these post-industrial landscapes from a nature point of view. So it kind of shows both the problem and one of the solutions, which I thought was quite interesting.
I'm fascinated by these post-industrial locations, how cities especially have been reclaiming them. But for the most part, what I see is neighborhoods or places that were warehouse districts or factories or something being turned into artist studios, hipster places with cool restaurants and galleries and things like this. This is something completely different. And I love the idea of nature reclaiming what was going to be an oil refinery in essence. This is fantastic. And the timing couldn't be better because it sounds like springtime would be the perfect time to go to see all these wildflowers that you're talking about, Shafik.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I first visited in the autumn, in the fall, which was not the ideal time to do it. But if you go, I'd say particularly in over the next few weeks onwards towards the summer, that's really the time to go. The orchids particularly are stunning.
Love wild orchids. You recently also wrote a piece for Adventure.com about Britain's rainforests. Now, when I think about places to go see rainforests, I think of Central America. Britain is not the first place that springs to mind, Shafik. Tell me a little bit about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that was really the appeal of the piece. I mean, I think most people outside of the UK will associate the country with rain, but not with rainforests. Believe it or not, kind of dating back 10,000 years or so to the end of the last ice age, the western side of the western coast of Britain was covered with rainforests. According to some estimates, maybe as much as 25% of the country was covered by these rainforests, and these were temperate rainforests. So it was obviously cooler, but similarly biodiverse, and they're places that were filled with mosses and lichen and epiphytes and that kind of thing. Now, the UK is one of the most, nature damaged countries in Europe. We have far less forest cover than our counterparts across the continent. I think only about 13% of the country is covered by forest. And today within that, there were only tiny patches, fragments of these rainforests, and they've largely, until recent years, they've drifted out of people's, out of the popular consciousness. But it's still possible to visit them, and they're just like Canvey Wick, they're biodiversity hotspots, and they're also tied in with these incredible myths, legends, and so on. And so I travelled up to North Wales, and I'm going to apologise in advance for my poor pronunciation, but I visited the rainforests of Coed, Vellenrhied, and Llyneg, which are in Snowdonia National Park, so a beautiful part of the world. But this patch of rainforest, which is kind of along the spread across a gorge, is next to a hydroelectric power plant. It's not far away from a nuclear power plant. So again, it's not somewhere that you might expect to be so rich in wildlife. But it's an incredible place. As soon as you step in, you feel like you're into another realm. It's admittedly, it's very moist. I mean, North Wales gets a lot of rain. This place gets around 200 days of rain a year, or it rains for 200 days a year rather. But it's incredibly rich in birds and insects and mosses, and there's countless shades of green as you walk through it. Yeah, and it's a really interesting place to explore. It's very unvisited. When I was there were no other visitors, which I don't think is particularly unusual. And now there were kind of tentative plans to help restore and expand the fragments of temperate rainforest like this, and there were similar small patches across, Western Scotland and Western England and as well as Wales. So they're very tied into the Welsh mythology. There's lots of wonderful stories about these these great trees being magicked into life and rising up as a great army. And also, again, because there's no escape from it, it's very tied into the climate emergency. So when I visited, it was in the summer. We'd had record temperatures. It had been 40 degrees Celsius here in London, wow, which was unheard of. We'd had wildfires and droughts. It was very, very extreme weather. And kind of a stone's throw away, metaphorically speaking, a short drive away from this rainforest is a place called Fairbourne, which is a seaside resort that's going to be one of the first towns, places in the UK that will be abandoned because of rising seawater. So it's a very evocative place to visit the rainforest, see the importance of it, because these are huge, great carbon sinks, as well as being, a source of great biodiversity. And you can see that, there's lots of reasons to protect, restore, and expand these rainforests. And if you need a further reminder, you just need to take a journey to the seaside resort of Fairbourne, where there's a formidable looking seawall, but one that will be, will prove inadequate when as the sea rises over the coming decades. If you're visiting the UK and you want to see a different side of the country, then check out our rainforests and our abandoned oil refineries in Essex. You'll find more than you might expect.
It's so interesting, Shafik, how you frame that not only as, kind of an oddity that Britain has rainforest, because people obviously don't think about that at first, but also how it relates to climate change. Because we can build as many freaking seawalls as we want. It's not going to keep the sea at bay. Walls can only be so, you can't build an entire wall around the entire island of Britain. I mean, it's just not possible. So, interesting way to frame it. Shafik, it's just been great catching up with you. It's been far too long. Thank you so much, because every time I talk to you, it feels like you open up the top of my head and just dump all of this cool stuff inside. I'm always thrilled to talk to you about far-flung places and maybe places closer to home. So thanks again for being on Destination Eat Drink. It's always a pleasure to catch up with you.
Oh, thank you, Brent. It's always an absolute pleasure chatting to you. I hope I haven't dumped too much eclectic information into your head over the last half hour or so. But it's kind of our chats are always so wide-ranging, which is lovely for me.
Okay, there you go. I always like having Shafik on the show because he's always heading somewhere off the beaten path that I would never think about, and that's what makes his trips so exciting. Plus, the dude has no fear. You can follow Shafik on his website, shafikmeghji.com. I've also got a link to his site in the show notes. Get that at destinationeatdrink.com/DED226. Well, that's it for this week. Next week, it's all about cheese, from artisan cheese in Toronto to vegan fondue to pimento cheese in North Carolina. So don't miss that. Until then, get over to destinationeatdrink.com. I just posted a story about a great vegetarian restaurant in Cascais, Portugal. Not only do they have great food, but there's a tiny rooftop terrace where you can eat as well. Get that at destinationeatdrink.com/blog. Destination Eat Drink is distributed by the Radio Misfits Podcast Network and Ed Silla. Thanks, Ed. I'm Brent Peterson. I'll see you down the road.
Join us next week for another culinary adventure on Destination Eat Drink, a presentation of the Radio Misfits Podcast Network.